I do want to present myself, to introduce myself in several sentences so that you know where I'm coming from politically. I mean, not where I was raised, but where I'm coming from as a state of mind. And although I think you got the impression already, but something more systematic. So this is one thing I'm going to do now. And then I will want to give a general background very lightly. I mean, I'm not going to say a lot about all these things, but I think this background is needed in order to understand the results of the elections and the internal politics in Israel. So these are my two opening remarks. So the first one, where I'm coming from, is my attitudes towards Zionism by and large. And I take Zionism to be a version of settler colonialism. This means that, as opposed to other versions of colonialism, the wish of the Zionist movement as a settler colonial movement is not the exploitation of the indigenous population. Like we had other versions of colonialism doing exactly this, using the labor, using the working hands, using their properties, but interested in the population in this way. I think the settler colonialism, and Zionism is an example of this, wishes to inherit the indigenous population instead of exploiting it. This means, well, saying it less nicely perhaps, is ethnic cleansing. And ethnic cleansing can be done through all sorts of methods. It's deportation, it's weakening and discriminating against in all sorts of ways. It can be an institutional discrimination, and there is institutional discrimination by law in Israel. It can be an economical discrimination, it can be cultural, and all these versions are present in Israel, in the Zionist state. It can be land grabbing, my topic from yesterday, of which I spoke and couldn't stop. And it can be criminalizing the indigenous population in all sorts of ways, both as civilian offense and as security offense, as political offenders, and other means. So this is a first statement. I want to be very clear now and say that this is not true only of the post-67 Israel. I mean, I'm not talking here only about what happened after the 67 war and the occupied territories. What happens in the occupied territories is terrible, and of course this is a state of military rule and with millions of people who have no rights at all. But it is also true on Israel inside the 67 borders, the 67 borders, I mean, because of the very idea of the Jewish state. Israel boasts in being a Jewish democratic state. I don't think there is anything like that. I don't think anything like that may exist at all. Democracy cannot be qualified. I mean, like there's no half pregnancy, there's no half democracy. There are better or worse democracies. But I know, I mean, there are all sorts of factors to be weighed. But there cannot be a democracy for Jews. So we have the example of South Africa during the apartheid regime. It wasn't a democracy. It wasn't a democracy for white and non-democracy for the black. It wasn't a democracy. And exactly the same goes for, the very Zionist project. So this is a thing that I want to clarify from the start. And just to add this opening remark and letting you an opportunity to translate it, so just one thing in order to close this. Having said all that, I think that criticism of Israel should not be taken not as anti-Semitism, and not every criticism of Israel is even anti-Israel. I can criticize America, I often do. I'm not anti-American. I wish America to be more socialist. It doesn't mean that I want America to be wiped out of the earth. I mean, people treat, for some reason, every criticism of the Israeli policy, especially in the very many years that we have right-wing government, as a criticism of Israel altogether. Are you pro-Israel or against Israel? But I can be very, very much pro-Israel, even Zionist, and criticize Israel. And this is something that, again, is very important for me to say on the start. So now to the background. The background I wanted has to do with the illusion of the peace process or peace talks or peace negotiations. Well, it depends on the period every time. It gets a new title, but it's the same, nothing. And this is something that has been going on for a lot of time, for many years. As I said, just the title has changed. And this is something that has to be acknowledged, again, before we reach the specific political situation at the moment. Because most of the Israeli politicians, from what is taken to be the left, and I'm talking now about the Jewish parties, I'll later say a lot about the Palestinian parties, but at the moment I concentrate on the Jewish parties. So most of the Israeli politicians from, let's call it the left, okay, I cannot do this all the time, but I qualify. So most of these, and even some Palestinian politicians, support the peace process. And needless to say that most of the right-wing parties support the same peace process or peace negotiations. Why do they do it? The thing is that they support the process, but not the result. I mean, they never want to reach a result. And, it depends. Here, you have to look differently at the right-wing people and the left-wing people. But on the whole, what is common to most of them, that they are not ready to reach a real, genuine, just agreement. I mean, something that we have on the table, actually, which is the Arab proposal. And, it's a two-state solution, something that is widely acknowledged and received in the international community, at least officially, again, with qualifications, with amendments, but it's something that is on the table. And in Israel, when people say this, this is, here's the agreement. No, we have to discuss, and we have to see, and we have to find the security solutions to all the security problems. It's always the security problems that actually they serve as a conversation stopper. I mean, whenever something is inconvenient, then there's a security problem, and everything halts, and we cannot go on. And then the process goes on, and it's the process that counts, mainly as a shield against criticism and sanctions that are threatened to come from the international community. So no, you see, we are talking peace here. You cannot interfere at the moment while we're simply reaching peace over the corner, but peace never comes. And this is something, again, that is common to most of the parties in the Israeli political scene. One last word for background before we reach these elections is what happens in the meantime while the peace process goes on or doesn't go on. What happens with the Palestinian population? And here I want to concentrate on the occupied side of the Palestinian equation. What happens is that on the ground, the settlements grow and grow. The Jewish settlements in the occupied territories grow and grow. A lot of money is invested in building them and strengthening them, and building schools and transportation and just even university and other educational institutions. Settlers' violence becomes more and more often. So we witness settler violence, settlers who come down from the Jewish settlements to especially villages, small villages mainly, in the night, they cut tires of cars, they shatter windows, they even break into mosques and do all sorts of bad things in them. I don't want to describe at the moment. The Gaza Strip is totally blocked, as you probably know. There are about 200,000 Palestinian inhabitants in eastern Jerusalem that is taken not to be occupied exactly and not to be the half inhabitants of Israel and half occupied, and they are treated really harshly by the municipality of Jerusalem. They get no fair education, no fair hygienic and water running and all those services. So all this is the continued situation that is becoming more and more unbearable. Add to this that every Palestinian family, it's true that every Palestinian family has or had in the past a prisoner, a political prisoner, someone who was either arrested or was sentenced, or both, of course, or was an administrative detainee for some period of time in the Israeli prisons. You go into a Palestinian home in the territories, and the first thing you see on the wall is the picture of a prisoner. And the presence of these issues that is hardly talked about in Israeli politics. It wasn't mentioned, for example, during the last elections. Not at all. There was no question of the Palestinian prisoners at all from either side. But this problem is a very heavy one. So just to give you the numbers very quickly, we are talking about 5,500 Palestinian political prisoners at the moment. People arrested, detained, in the process, or simply sentenced and spending time in prison. So that's a lot. Out of this number, 450 are administrative detainees. This means people who are are arrested and are brought to prison and are never tried. No one even intends to put them to trial because there are all sorts of vague accusations that the prisoner himself doesn't know. He's never told what is held against him. And every 6 months, the detention can be prolonged, and it is prolonged often. So that's just to give you, white and black background for my talk, and then I reach the elections. As you know, I suppose, until 1977, the ruling party in Israel was the Labour Party. In 1977, there was an earthquake because the Likud party, the right-wing party, which had always been in the opposition, took force. And since then, although we had all sorts of movements, it is a right-wing coalition that leads Israel, and we are talking about a lot of time from 1977. I don't mean to say that there was no Labour Party coalition. Famously, the one which Yitzhak Rabin led, and you surely know that he was assassinated when he led his peace process. Then the Oslo Accords. So there were, of course, intervention in other governments, but on the whole, this is something that have to be remembered. So what happened in these particular elections was that for some reason there was a feeling by certain people. I must admit I didn't share this feeling, but it somehow reached me. There was an optimism from the left and the fear from the right, it depends on your perspective, that this rule of the right wing is going to end, and the Labour Party, which now called itself the Zionist camp, in order to attract more voters from the right, this is how you win, they thought. So they formed a new group. They brought in an ex-minister that sat just recently as Minister of Justice, and before this, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Tzipi Livni. Sorry. And they brought her, and they formed the Zionist camp, and the feeling was that they are now powerful, and parallel to this, that everyone is fed up from Bibi Netanyahu, that we cannot stand this person anymore, and it's not only leftists, it's unanimous that we don't want to see not him and not his wife and not the entourage, no one around him, and let him go. So there was, media is responsible for that, and people in the media have their own tendencies, but the general atmosphere was that here we have a chance of transferring power. Okay, so now if this is the case, then I have to explain how come it didn't happen, or to put it differently, but the same point, why I didn't believe it was going to happen. Because, as I said, I didn't think it was going to happen. Even getting the polls that weren't accurate eventually. You could see that, it's more of a wishful thinking to believe that the government is going to change drastically and that the power is going to move. But people want, we all have wishful thinking, and I sympathize with that. It's the situation of a human condition, one could say, to believe in what you wish. So people did wish that to happen, and therefore convinced themselves that this is what's going to happen. So why didn't it happen? And there are many explanations, and I think many of them, there are parallel explanations. All of them, I think, are good. They're not contradicting each other. And I take into consideration that what I said before, that the Zionist camp, the Labour Party, was getting stronger, and that many in the Jewish population, let alone the Palestinian population, don't like Bibi Netanyahu. I mean, even Likud voters, I'm sure of it and I know it. So how come it didn't happen? One of the. Do you want me to stop now? Okay. One of the factors hasn't to do with the Likud at all. It has to do with the Labour Party and the history of the Labour Party and its behavior throughout the years. And here there are two main things that I wish to emphasize. The first is a historical fact. As I said, from the establishment of the State of Israel in 48 until 77, that's 30 years almost, the Labour Party was the ruling party. And its rule, which was supposed to be leftist, it's still called by many of the reporters even, I mean, people who know, it's still called, this is why I said left, it's still called the left, because it was formed as socialist even. It supported social welfare. It did support social welfare. It was much more centralizing in power, much more as opposed to the right wing, against privatization. Then at that time, so you could think, in sort of red or at least pinkish terms about this rule. But in fact, when you look at it, it was a very privileged Ashkenazi, white people coming from Europe, immigrating to Zion from Europe, who ruled the rest. And you had all sorts of other populations within, other fractions within the Israeli society. Again, the Arabs now they have to be considered as one of those factions, and all these factions, for all sorts of reasons, felt underprivileged, felt they were out of the big hegemony, the big ruling party of the Ashkenazi immigrants who established the state. what is amazing that after all these years, from 77, still when you look at the symbolic power and the economic power, it is still the same kind of population that rules Israel. When you look, and I'm talking by and large about Ashkenazi Jews, I mean, people who immigrated to Israel from, in the early years, in the 20s and 30s and 40s, from Europe mainly, or even before. So first generation, second generation, and so on. And when you look at these bastions of power, I'm talking about academia, I'm talking about all the legal establishments, especially the High Court of Justice, but every other aspect of, like, the Ministry of Law. And you look at these establishments, the cultural establishment, artists, writers, those who get the Israeli prize, this hegemony is still with us and is still identified with the same Labour Party people, more or less. I mean, I'm sure that if you put polls, voting polls, in the Ministry of Law, for example, and I think the Ministry of Law is important in this respect because, what is more important than the Ministry of Law? And the Finance Ministry. And I don't think that most of them vote for the right wing. They still vote for the Labour Party. I mean, it is still the same people. And it is still the hegemony. I'm sure that this is true I live there, I know this is true of academia. It's not that everyone votes for the so-called left, but the left is quite strong there, much more than the right wing. I'm sure there are middle parties, and I'll say a word about them later. But on the whole, you get hegemony still. We are 2015, and there is still a feeling that is translated into facts that the hegemony is still the old Labour Party. So people who want to oppose the present situation somehow oppose, in a way, still the Labour Party, although the Likud has been in power for so many years. So this is one factor. So who is the other side? Who are the underprivileged? Who are those who oppose the hegemony that I just described and feel underprivileged and still go with the right wing no matter what it does, even if they hate Bibi? And again, I insist on this because I know some of them really don't want him to be in power, but this is what they have, and they wouldn't vote for the Labour no matter what. So I want to focus on three such factions. One very large faction is the Mizrahi Jews. These are people who came from Arab countries. By and large, I mean, it could be from Morocco and Algeria and Tunisia, but also from Iran or whatever it's called, from Yemen and from Turkey, like my husband's father. So you have them from all around, people who are not classified as white and never felt as belonging to the hegemony, never had any sympathy to the way Israel was built, the Zionist state was built from the start until 1967. They were marginalized. Their culture was marginalized. They didn't get the best jobs. They were put, in the first years after the establishment of the state, they were put on the borders in what was called development towns. Well, development towns is something that has to be developed, but no one developed them, actually. So maybe an industry here, an industry there, no train services, reasonable train services, so there was no good connection between periphery and center. And the feeling of hostility from the periphery to the center was very important in forming something that could not be overcome, even after the political power has switched. So this is one factor, and Actually, a periphery could be, I'm sure it is like that even in the Czech Republic, as we know from other places. A periphery can also be in the capital of the country, because there is the center, which is, you know, the ruling, the hegemony, and there are the neighbors, the neighborhoods that surround the center, that are poorer, that don't get the best services, that don't get the best schools, that their children cannot aspire to do anything like to be legal experts or artists, and have to do with the lesser schools and the lesser professions, and they get a self-image of something that is alien to the country. So this is a third of the population. Shall I stop now? Or? The second group of the periphery, or the not hegemonic power, is the large group of immigrants coming from Russia after the Soviet Union was dismantled in the 90s. You know, there were no immigrants for many years. No one could come to Israel from the Soviet Union. But then the Soviet Union collapsed, and hundreds of thousands came. Hundreds of thousands. I mean, we're talking about really large numbers. And these people came with the hostility, and maybe this is something that you know the atmosphere, at least because of being so close to it, with the resentment of everything that smells of Labour Party, of socialist values. Even though the Labour Party, I think, forgot most of its socialist values, still the fact that it is called the Labour Party, and this is part of the reason they changed to the Zionist camp. It didn't work, but this is what was in their mind. To attract those Russian immigrants that were hostile to anything socialist, Labour, not capitalist, not right-wing. I mean, these were people who objected everything that they knew before, or they connected with what they knew before, and they wanted a strong, militaristic Zionist state, not to be ashamed of itself, and so the automatic tendency is toward the right, and it is still so. It doesn't matter which party on the right. I mean, there is a party that builds solely on those votes, and actually it shrank in the last elections, but it doesn't matter. So they didn't vote for Israel, our home, which is that party, and they voted for Likud. It doesn't matter. They still vote for the right because they have this resentment of the Labour Party. And the third periphery group, the third and last in this overview, is the Orthodox Jews, the religious Jews. And these are divided between Ashkenazi and Mizrahi. They form different Orthodox parties. There is an Orthodox religious party of the Ashkenazi Jews and another for the Mizrahi Jews, and they are very different in all sorts of tendencies and their histories and everything. But both go automatically with the right wing. They both resent the Labour Party. Now, this is something that deserves actually complete lecture on its own, because it's really fascinating politics. But just to be very short at the moment, I have many more plans for you. So I'll just say this: there is the feeling that the Labour Party is hostile to religion, whereas the right wing is not. Now, it has something to do with reality. It's everywhere like this. It's not totally true. It's not, and it shouldn't have been like this. I mean, if I was leading the Labour Party, and it's not a coincidence that I don't, but if I was leading the Labour Party, this is something they have in hand. I mean, they could form a nice relationship with the religious parties. They didn't do this. This is a big mistake from the Zionist camp, from the Labour Party. Why am I saying this? I mean, not only pragmatically, but also historically. Historically, the Orthodox Ashkenazi Jews went hand in hand with the ruling coalition, when it was the ruling coalition, the Labour. They want to be close to the power. And whoever is in power, they want to be there. They want to get their money. There's two things that are important for them. They want to be subsidized for the schools, the yeshivas, and they don't want to go to the army, a cause that I wholly sympathize with, as you heard. So I'm totally against the recruitment of the religious people, and this is what they want. They don't want to rule. They don't want to lead the country. They don't really care whether there are peace processes or not. They do care about the settlements because many settlements are now inhabited by Orthodox Jews. But this is because the land is cheap. This is because the land is stolen from the Palestinians and they can afford it. If they were given another cheap land within Israel, they would go there. They are not attached to the land. I mean, they simply want to survive. So this is what they want, subsidies and not going to the army. And when the labor camp gave them this, they were with them. When the right-wing camp gave them the feeling that they can support this, they vote for the right-wing. The case of the Mizrahi Jews is different. Their politics is a bit different, and I'm not going to go into it. But the sense is that the same hegemony that I spoke about, cultural, judicial, academic, and the whiteys that are involved, that they are secular for spite, that they despise religion, whereas the right wing respects religion, and actually it has some proof on the ground that once in a while, and we had this in these elections as well, there comes a very smart Zionist from the labor camp and says, "I don't want the votes of all those religious primitives who kisses the Bibles." And why would you say that? Why don't you respect them? And why should you say this, for God's sake? So every time there is a smart guy who says it, and just it proves what they suspect all along. So this is the third group, and I move on. So I'm just reminding you where I am. I mean, where in my lecture I am. I'm trying to explain why the Labour Party or the Zionist camp didn't take the lead this time, despite the expectations that people had. And all this long explanation about hegemony was the first factor. The other, much shorter one, has to do with the fact, very simple fact, that they didn't offer any real alternative. I mean, you have the right wing. We understand what the right wing is about. I mean, they want to keep the occupation without keeping it. Okay, we know it. And, I mean, they keep it, they sustain it, they build settlements, they are not ashamed. One of those parties in the right wing, the slogan for the elections was, "We are not ashamed." So, we are not ashamed, we were not ashamed of ourselves, we simply say it, we want the occupation, we want... And they say... so, this is what they say, this is what they do. We are for the security of the Jewish people. We want the settlements. We don't believe the Palestinians. We keep our safety as at the first place. Peace is nothing. We want to talk about peace. They say it. I mean, we want to talk about peace, but we don't really believe it's achievable. They say it. I mean, Bibi Netanyahu and his people. They said it's not achievable. Stop dreaming about peace. There's not going to be any peace tomorrow. And so we'll concentrate on building a secure country. For this, we have to rule the territories. We have to discriminate against our local population. I mean, our population, because their nationalistic aim is a threat. Okay, we know what the right wing is about. This means that every once in a while we have to wage a nice war on Gaza or in Lebanon, and okay, this is part of the package, and you buy it. What does the Labour Party offer? Same thing. They say they oppose this, But in every junction, when there is a decision, I mean, let's take the Gaza, the war on Gaza last year, or in 2008 or 9, or every other one, I mean, in Lebanon. Let's take the case of dividing Jerusalem. Yeah, there's not going to be a two-state solution without dividing Jerusalem. No, you can forget about it. Everyone knows it. So why you insist that you want to keep Jerusalem as one unit? We're not going to divide Jerusalem, or maybe we will give the Palestinians. And then it's just a shadow, very, very, pale shadow of the right-wing policy. The right-wing, we understand what they're saying. What is the alternative? The alternative is just a pale nothing that we don't understand its cause. I mean, what would you do instead of the war in Gaza? What would you do with Hamas in Gaza? Are you able to talk with Hamas? No, we're against Hamas. We keep talking with Abu Mazen forever. But no, we cannot deal with Hamas. So the automatic result is a war on Gaza. And then what do you say about the criminal soldiers? What do you say about killing of 500 children in Gaza in the last war? Nothing. Because the army is us. I mean, our kids serve in the army, and we are not going to go against our own kids and, kids by and large. And so, if there's no real alternative, why vote for you? The idea behind this pale non-alternative is that if we want to bring people from the right wing to the left, we have to resemble the right wing. Because people, if they wanted to be left, they would be there already. So if we want to attract those people from the right, we should resemble the right. I think this is the wrong logic, and I'm also a teacher of logic, so you should believe me. But okay, and it didn't work, as you could see. But anyway, this is the strategy. This is the idea behind it. Now, in this, if we have this idea for a moment, we entertain it for a moment. This means, and we know it from other countries like in Britain, for example, the left tries to go to the center. And then there is this new notion, I mean, already several years now, but this new notion of not right-wing, not left-wing, the center parties. So the Labour cannot really present itself as center, but being close to the center. But now there's a sort of imaginary vacuum. And in this imaginary vacuum, every elections that we have a new party that presents itself as the center. So last time, there was a party that got many votes, and it was called There Is a Future. It called There Is a Future, Yesh Atid. It was led by Yair Lapid. It was led by Yair Lapid, and the idea was, we are the center, we are the hegemony. And how they looked exactly like the hegemony. Rich people, Ashkenazi people, secular people, like what I said, people who despised religion. They wanted all the religious people to go to the army. And they got a lot of votes last time. And they got into the coalition, kicked out, the last elections, kicked out the religious parties out of the coalition, passed a law that the religious people should go to the draft, to the army, that everyone who doesn't go has to pay. There is a criminal law against it, and the leader of the party was the Minister of Finance. So that was, the central party. What did they achieve apart from this law against the Haredi Jews? Nothing. Nothing was got better in the financial sphere, and nothing else was. And this person, personally, Yair Lapid, had all the time clashes with Netanyahu. They hated each other. And he was eventually kicked. What brought the last government down was actually the tensions between these two people, the leader of this strong center party, There Is a Future, and Netanyahu. So he got out. This time he got half of the votes he got last time. And now there's a new star in the center. The new star is in the center. His party is called Kulanu, which is all of us. Why all of us? Because what he wants to intimate is that Yesh Atid, that Lapid, belonged to the hegemony, was white, was rich. And my central party, which is Moshe Kahlon, is led by a Mizrahi Jew. Is led by someone who doesn't come from money, whereas the other one was rich, was born rich. It doesn't come from the rich families. He knows hard work. He knows in economics, and he's going to make things better from central. I mean, I don't care about outside and foreign affairs. I don't know anything about security and Palestinians. I ignore the Palestinian question altogether. All I want is to embetter the economical situation. This is not what I'm going to do. And he said, I'll go with whoever gives me the Ministry of Treasure. Now, if it's going to be the Labour Party, fine. If it's going to be Netanyahu, less fine, because I hate him, but okay. As I said, I mean, this is unanimous. He says this, again, I mean, he was coming from the Likud. He was formerly a Likud member, one of those princes, and he couldn't, yes, Kahlon, he left the Likud because he couldn't stand it any longer. So, but now he's going to sit with Netanyahu and be his finance minister. So this is the scene looked at from the center, and now I'm reaching the right wing. So we're left with two factions that I want to concentrate on. The last one will be the joint list of the Arab parties. But before that, I have to speak about the right wing. And the right wing was composed this time, and is composed in several other occasions from 4 factions. 3 parties and something else. And the something else is an extremely explicit racist party. Luckily, it didn't get the minimal votes, and it simply, we shouldn't talk about it today. Although it's interesting that it exists. But it didn't get the minimal vote, and we're not stuck with it. The 3 leading parties in the right are the Likud. I mentioned all of them already. The Likud, of course, led by Netanyahu, the one who doesn't apologize, I'm not ashamed of anything, the Jewish Home, and the one leading the Russian immigrants, Lieberman, he's called. Israel Our Home, it's called. And so the Jewish Home and Israel Our Home are the alternatives to the Likud. And the real surprise, I admit, and everyone admits, the real surprise that we got this time is that we thought that the votes among the 3 would be divided differently. Because both these parties, the Israel Our Home and the Jewish Home, were much, much bigger. The Likud was much smaller than they are at the moment. And we thought even that it would get smaller. The result was that the Likud got 30 votes out of I don't know what, and it simply drank the votes of the other two radical right parties. And that is amazing. And that is something that needs to be explained. How did it draw the electorate of those 2 other parties? Because most of the votes it didn't get from the center, let alone Labour voters. All the votes, it's 30 members of Knesset. It's a quarter of the Knesset is Likud. That's a huge party. And how can it be explained? Especially given the fact that Netanyahu is so despised by most of the population. So how to explain, how to fix this broken story? And there are many explanations for this. One of the explanations that I think is important is that the Likud itself moved much more to the right. I mean, it was explicitly right-wing, much more than it used to be before. He says, Netanyahu, forget about the two-state solution. I'm sure you heard that. If you heard anything from the last elections, these are two things that Bibi said. One is that forget about the two-state solution. I know I mentioned the two-state solution, but not any longer. So it simply drew, if the prime minister says so, we can vote for him if this is what we believe. Remember what I said about pale options. There were people in the radical right that regarded the Likud as a pale option of the real right. And if the Likud turns into a real right that is explicit and doesn't apologize, then we can vote for him. So this is one factor. And another is the fact that it's intentionally incited against the left, the horrible left, and especially the Arabs. And the other thing that you probably heard about the last elections is that on the day of the elections, at about the polls close at 10 o'clock in the evening, and about 6 o'clock, Bibi Netanyahu released on Facebook and on the social media a video clip where he turns to his voters, to the Likud voters, and says, the Arabs are transported in buses to the polls. Go out and vote Likud. Just save us from this terrible enemy that is our population. I mean, it's my citizens. I'm the prime minister of all of them. But this fifth of the population, of the Israeli population, is so threatening, they go and vote. This is what they don't plant bombs. They go and vote. They exercise their right to vote. It's so threatening, you should go and vote Likud. And it worked. At the very last moment, people got out, and I know personally people also thought, I hate this man, I'm not going to vote for some other party because I'm a Likud member. I really know, and I know other people who know personally. Yeah, people, I don't want Netanyahu. I'm fed up with this guy, but I'm not going to vote to anyone else. So I'll stay at home. What's wrong with that? I'll stay at home. And then when he issued this urgent call, the Arabs are voting, then they got up at the very last moment and went to the polls. And this is what brought, the real surprise of the election, the fact that Netanyahu got so many votes drawn out of his own camp, actually, his own right-wing camp. Okay, before I reach the good news, and there are good news, two good news, I just want to mention one small party that shouldn't be ignored. It only got 5 seats in the Knesset. It's on the left. It's a liberal party. It's called Meretz. I didn't give you the name, but I think it should be mentioned. There were times when it was bigger. Now it shrank to 5. It almost fell out of the Knesset because of the high minimum that was to which I'll get in a moment. But this is a classical liberal party. They are Zionists. They fight for human rights all over. They are explicitly against the occupation. They want a two-state solution on the 67 border. They want to accept the Arab proposal with minor changes. They fight constantly against the abuse of human rights in the territories and within Israel. Still, they haven't done the last step, I think, in my mind, because for them it's really important to belong to somehow to the consensus of the Jewish population, and for that it takes time for them until they criticize. Where is it? It's okay. Until they criticize a war that is waged, there is a hesitation for several days before they say this war is unjust, and or, you should only bomb from the air, but don't go to, all sorts of qualifications. There is an hesitation there in the margin that, for me, rules them out as an option, but for many people as well, as you can see, because it's tiny. It's a tiny party. Still, it is very sympathetic, and it's something that I wanted to mention, because human rights are really important for these people. Now I reached, as I said, the two good news. The best news from my point of view is the formation of the joint list. And the joint list is the list composed of the three Arab parties we had before in the Knesset. So first of all, I have to explain why they joined forces. Why is the joint list? The Lieberman from Israel Our Home, whom I mentioned before, wanted to see the Arabs out of the Knesset. He actually said that. And for that, he thought that if we raise the minimum the minimal percentage of voters in order to get into the Knesset, then the three factions in the Arab society, each one of them has 4 members of Knesset, 5 members of Knesset. If we raise the minimum, then some of them at least will stay out of the Knesset, especially the smallest one of the three. It's called Tajamu, and it had only 3 members of Knesset. There was no chance that it would pass the minimum that was required, and Lieberman wanted them out. And he passed the law of the minimum, and almost my real hope in these elections, I have to confess, was to see Lieberman out because of his own law, and it was really realistic. He got 6 members. It wasn't really far from a sin that they would be in and he would be out. But this is only for fairy tales. Anyway, the Arab parties realized that this was the case, and they joined forces. So it came out of, a contingency. It was, in a way, forced on them. And the three are what used to be the Communist Party, now, let's say, the Socialist Party, the Nationalistic Party, which I just mentioned, the Tajamu, and the Islamic Party. So just think, the Islamic, nationalistic, and communist, how can they join forces? They're so different from each other. And there was hardly any optimism, especially from people around. They thought they would not collaborate one day. I mean, they bring so different heritages and so different perspectives and points of view that they simply wouldn't be able to collaborate. And the miracle, which is really, really fascinating, is that they're collaborating fantastically. And what happened was, like many times when you have a synthesis of different forces, it's sort of dialectical procedure. And instead of a contradiction that, explodes, what happened was that something forceful, invigorating, and new was created. And now you have the voices, the Islamic voices, listen to the communists, even within, in the campaign, even within the community. They meet the communists, they are not so bad as we heard. The Islamics are not as dogmatic as we thought. Suddenly there's talk among these people that never occurred or didn't occur for so long. And I think this is a good news for itself. The better part, maybe, is that they got many seats. So now, because I vote for this party, if you haven't guessed this before, so now we form the third party in the Knesset. So there is the Likud, there is the Zionist camp, and there is the joint list. And in a second, I'll reach to even better scenario that may happen. But this already is a fantastic achievement. The leader of this party, who is new to the Jewish faces, is called Ayman Odeh. He is a member of the Communist Party. He was the secretary of the Communist Party in recent years, and he was newly elected as leader of the Communist Party, of the Communist faction of this, and because that was the bigger of the three, he was chosen to lead the whole list. And here we have a lawyer from Haifa, very nice, young and full of energy, and he knows how to speak to different populations. I mean, there is, among all those political analyses, there is room for personal charisma. And that man has a personal charisma. You see him interviewed, and and you see even the starkest Zionist interviewers, and they melt before him because really they're not going to vote for him. Don't delude yourself. But they cannot be hostile. They cannot be hostile towards him as they were to other Palestinian leaders. Bula, for this, the Communist Party has never defined itself as an Arab party. This is, what am I doing there otherwise? But it was called always a joint party, even before the joint list was formed as Arab and Jewish, and it had this platform, this common socialist platform common to Jews and Arabs. And actually, when people were talking about the Arab parties, they said the Arab parties and the Communist parties going together, because they always had, I think almost always, they had a member of Knesset that was Jewish. Almost or always, I'm not sure. But most, Kol hazman? Always, okay. Anyway, I don't remember now if there was a year that we didn't have a Jewish member, but on the whole, and especially now, we have a Jewish representative in this joint list coming from the Communist Party. So thanks, Makbula, for this correction. I wanted to round up by offering the other good news. What is going to happen now? So there are two scenarios. One, which now seems, they're still working on building the coalition, so we don't know what will be the result. But what seems at the moment the most natural result is that the right wing will take over, and all those parties that I mentioned, the three right wing, pure right wing, with the Kulanu, all of us, of Kahlon, who is going to be, of course, the Minister of Treasure, and the two Orthodox religious party, they will form a bloc of 67 members of the 120 members in Knesset. They will rule. So this doesn't sound like good news, I know, and it's not, but it's a bit better than what we had. It's a bit better in two respects. First, because, as I said, I object the treatment that the Orthodox Jews got, the religious Jews got, vis-a-vis the draft, forcing them to go to the army, and this is going to be wiped out of the law, and I'm happy for this. I'm happy for them and for me. I don't want so many soldiers, and I don't want forced soldiers anyway. So this is one bit of good news. The other is that within this coalition, this Kahlon person and the leader of one of the Orthodox parties, the Mizrahi Orthodox parties, are going to work for the poor. So whereas now we have a very small, tiny class of rich people who simply profit from everything, and all the rest are getting just impoverished more and more. Even, middle class is just going down every minute. Middle class couples or singles who wish, in their 30s to buy an apartment, it's simply becoming utterly impossible for them. And I think this new coalition may work, of course, in capitalistic terms, but a bit more social welfare, a bit more towards the people rather than only, financiers and and people who are coming from the rich parties. So this is one option, one scenario which I believe is the more, we have more chances of it being fulfilled. If this doesn't happen, there is another scenario, and this is the scenario the ugly scenario of what's called the National Unity Coalition, which is based on a combination of the Labour Party, the Zionist camp, and the Likud, and others who will fit in, with or without the Orthodox, with or without Kahlon, or probably with, and we'll see. But they are big enough in order to establish such a coalition. This is a stalemate. This is terrible news, I think, because internationally it will give the cover. We don't have a right-wing coalition, as I formally presented, but something, again, the peace process. The peace talks, endless peace negotiations that will lead to nothing. Again, it's a sort of whitewashing the right-wing policy without any change. So what's good about that? Nothing, apart from the fact that the third party, the third biggest party, you remember who this is, the third biggest party is going to lead the opposition. Now, being the leader of the opposition has a formal status in Israel. And it's going to be the joint party, the joint list. And if we have a national unity coalition, then the joint list, the Arab and communist list, is going to lead the opposition. And first, it's going to be a real opposition. Second, because it has a formal status, every leader, international leader, for example, who is coming to visit Israel, has to meet with and listen to the opposition. The opposition leader has to be updated formally, against by law, has to be updated periodically by the prime minister about his plans and what he has to do. I want to see this happening. I mean, there's something to look forward to. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening.